So we can't possibly deal with all these questions really effectively in one introductory level course. But I would be amiss if I let the euthyphro dilemma pass without some kind of response, because there are many out there, and the crash course video and some other sources may lead you to think that, wow, the euthyphro dilemma, this is really a big deal. How can you say that God sets ethics? Which, interestingly enough, um, the euthyphro dilemma the response to it, I should say, can lead in another direction in which the idea of objective ethics can actually be an argument for God and potentially an argument for an understanding of what religion is most true. Many religious apologists will use it, not the euthyphro dilemma, but will use the idea of objective ethics in that way. And so I want to mention that briefly. There are some chapters in your textbook. We're not going to cover those. But you can look at them if this subject interests you. So the euthyphro dilemma is this idea that, the question of, is something right because the God says it's right, or does the God say it's right because it's just, because it's just right? So if it's just right because the God says so, then at least in Socrates' day, when you have multiple gods, right, you have the issue of, or the idea of multiple gods, you have the issue that, well, one God likes this, another God likes that, so which one's right? Which one's good and righteous and just and pious? What's the right action? In a monotheistic understanding, Islam, Christianity, to say that it's right because God says it's so leads to the issue that someone could say, well, God's saying this now, but God said that earlier. So did God change his mind? Did it used to be wrong and now it's right? Is it, was it wrong to murder, but now it's right to kill a bunch of people? Was it, are you supposed to be loving, but now you can be hateful? Or are you supposed to have only one spouse and now you can have multiple? I mean, does it change, and how would we know it changed, and how would we hear that from God? And what that creates problems for some professors. There are some philosophers, some thinkers. There are some Muslim and Christian writers who say, yes, absolutely, whatever God says goes. God is the absolute authority. So he can say, right now it's not good to kill, but in 10 years, maybe it will be. And goodness and rightness only come from the direct will, absolute will of God. He can say whatever he wants because he is God. Now, some of those theologians who take that approach will say, but he wouldn't do that. He won't change his mind. He says he won't, so he won't. But that creates problems because, well, how do you know he won't if he can change? If he can do it, then how do you know he won't change the rule that he won't change? That's a problem. The flip side, many philosophers say, well, if God says it's right because it's right, then what makes it right for God? Is there something above God? Is there something above that God? Which sounds like a clever philosophical sort of trap. I think, honestly, it's not a fair approach to what most theistic, those who believe in God, right, thinkers would say. Is you're being ridiculous, right? That's not the point. If you look at Thomas Aquinas and other Christian and Muslim thinkers, the notion is that the goodness, this is even in Plato and Socrates' ideas, right? So the goodness itself is within God. It comes from out of his nature. And because he is good, he dictates good things. So it's not that there's something above God based upon which God makes these good laws. God makes the laws because they're good. They're good because they're part of his nature, not because of they're some dictate of his kind of, well, right now God feels this way and tomorrow he'll feel that way. No, for the theistic thinker, the reality is God is a certain way. He is consistent with his own nature. He remains faithful to his own ideals and understandings and reality as he makes it. And so that's this idea that it's rooted in God's very nature, that he does good, that he says what is right and what is good. And so, yes, God only says what is good because God only commands what is according to his very nature. So you can look into that more. I honestly think the euthyphro dilemma is made a little bit more of than what it should be. A lot of philosophers want to make it into an attack on theism or an attack on Christianity or Islam. And some Christians and Muslims take the bait and they'll have this bite the bullet, response. Yeah, God can say whatever he wants. God's God. I think the challenge of the euthyphro, when you read it, was really a challenge for those who would believe in multiple gods who often disagree. Those multiple gods in disagreement, that creates the problem that euthyphro has. And that may have been from the Platonic perspective what Plato, via Socrates' discussion or by sharing Socrates' discussion, is trying to show us is there has to be one ultimate good that is the source of the standard. It's as easy to interpret Euthyphro, the dialogue of Plato, that way, I think more fairly so than it is to try to make a dilemma out of it for theistic thinkers. But nonetheless, it's there. That said, the flip side of there's a whole part of your textbook on religion and ethics that we're not delving into deeply. We did the Euthyphro. I think it's very important to look at it. But there are other issues in there about religion and ethics, and those issues are, one of them is that the idea that objective ethics are actually an argument for God, that if there are objective ethics, there must be a God. Or at least there must be some judgment standard and life after death. The reasoning behind that, I'll just give you the simple version. You can look at it in your textbook because they have the whole argument. They have two sides on that. But the idea is that if there are things that you should do, no matter what the cost, no matter what the consequences, then there must be some positive outcome, or you really shouldn't do it. Since our lives are short, we die, we all die, that's unavoidable. If you say that ethics are objective, then it could be possible that you would be obligated to do something that would cost you ultimately your life. And that only makes any real sense. That's only true, can only be true and sensible and reasonable if there's something beyond this life. So this is how the argument goes. If there are objective ethics, then there must be some form of afterlife. There must be some form of God. To which many religious apologists will use to go from there and say, this is the truer religion because, look, these things are things that almost everyone agrees are true across the board about ethics. These things are objectively right. These things are objectively wrong, and this religion does the most to uphold them. So those arguments are out there. They're real. I think there's some strength to them. Read the chapters if you're more interested. We're not going to go there because we've delved so much into objective versus relative, and we need to move on looking at the different schools of thought. Utilitarianism is where we're going now. So as we look at that, there's plenty to watch on this, some introductory videos and a lecture from a Harvard philosopher that's really quite good, and the discussion board. So we'll be looking at that this week.